welcome to We're So Bloody Early. My name is Jake. I'm 33 years old. I'm a husband and a recent dad. This show is going to be a focus on Bitcoin and how our journeys to this amazing new asset class has affected our lives. I personally have been lucky to work as a broker through my life, an investor, and a couple of failed startups behind me. I'm very excited to start this new project. And these are my two great co-hosts, Matty and Jigs.
Hi guys, I'm Matt. I'm a 35-year-old father and husband, massive lover of sport. I'm an aerospace engineer come entrepreneur. I've been running my own engineering consultancy now for 5 years. I have a diverse range of skills across multiple industry sectors, and that's now led me to my new love, Bitcoin.
And I'm Jigs, 41 years of age, husband, father of three. Worked in the cash and transit industry for 20 years in a labor-intensive job. Recently retired for about a year now. I'm a stay-home dad and a hybrid trader.
Together, we're the co-hosts of the We're So Bloody Early show. In the future, you'll expect to hear from some special guests that we get along to talk through their experiences. Hopefully, we'll be creating some educational content that brings our friends and family along on this journey as well. And we hope you enjoy. Always reach out if you have any questions whatsoever. Thank you very much.
So what I want to do is just pull the conversation onto the next phase, which is then around storage. So you've decided to buy Bitcoin, you've researched an exchange, you've done your KYC, you've got your money through, you're like, bingo, I've got it. What happens next? Jigsy, I'll go to you first. And you mentioned before something about leverage platforms or yield platforms and products. Can you talk me through how you currently have your digital assets stored and why you've done that? And then Matty, will go to you.
So initially I bought my Bitcoin in that, and then I stored it on Ledger, which is a cold storage, which is it's almost like a USB, but it's encrypted and it's offline. No one can get to it. I have only access to it, and I have to plug it into a computer to move things around or get things on it or get things off it. Well, you can send to it, but you need to connect it up to a computer or something so it verifies. So I had everything on there, but I saw an opportunity where I could earn dividends or interest on my Bitcoin. And I looked around and there were multiple platforms that offered this. But to me, security is number one. And the best I saw for security was Celsius. And so I took a percentage of what I have and put it onto Celsius to earn interest or earn dividends. And so that's what it does. It sits on there, and they have the best security. They have a great feature on there called HODL mode, which again, you've got your 2FA authenticator, plus you got your password, plus everything else. And then they got a HODL mode on there, which is a 24-hour. So even if it got hacked, I get an alert to say it's been, someone's trying to access your account, and they can't even access it for 24 hours. And that gives me time to then contact them and say, hey, I think there's some fraudulent activity going on. But at the same time, so I'll give you a story. The reason I went this route was because I had everything on a USB or on a Ledger, or I think Jake, you use a Trezor. Is that right? A Trezor. And the reason I looked at this option was because my cousin, she was celebrating her 1 or 2 or 3 year wedding anniversary with her husband, and they went for a bike ride. And I'm a pretty active guy. I average 90 Ks a week. Anything could happen to me in 90 Ks. Today I was out there for 3 hours. I could have been hit by a car, bus. I could have tripped over, cracked my head, whatever. But she was riding her bike. They just went for a 4K trail ride, and her husband was riding in front of her, just flicked up a loose twig, branch, whatever. And as it fell right into a spoke, and it flung around, hit her front frame, flipped her over. She was wearing a helmet, hit her head, and that was it. She was out cold, was in an induced coma for a couple of months, came out of it and thought it was 4 years earlier.
Shit.
And I'm like, oh my God, like what happens if something like that happened to me? And I just assume that that would never happen to me. And then all of a sudden that BTC is gone because I can't remember how to access it or whatever, you know? And so this is why I tell my wife and I tell my dad all these different things. I don't give everyone everything, but they can piece the puzzles together if they had to, if something happened. But I think it's important, again, to diversify your storage. Don't have all your storage in one spot. So that's my take on it, you know. So I earn a little bit of interest, and I'm sure over time, with the interest that I earn, because the name of the game is to buy Bitcoin and then try and accumulate as much Bitcoin, whether you do it through DCA every week with your pay from your wage, or whether you do it through trading. But you always want to take the time that you spend earning fiat, right? You want to take that energy that you've spent, that you get rewarded for in fiat, you want to take that and you want to store it. Now, you can't store it in fiat because they're printing it and it's devaluing your time. So you want to take that energy that you've spent and you want to put it into something like Bitcoin where it doesn't get printed away. And if you're going to do that, well, then you want to diversify it into different storage allocations, because if something had to happen to one, well, then it's gone forever. So, you know, a friend of mine that I worked with, he's an older guy. And so what he did was he just put it on a ledger and buried it. And I'm like, well, what happens now? What happens now? Like, you're the only person in the world that knows. And if you have a heart attack, that's it. Whereas if you have split it between there and, you know, like a Celsius, well, anyway, was earning interest, or on Jake will elaborate on Unchained Capital, which I think is a brilliant thing, and something I'll definitely look after this bull run. If it's split, you know, and you have your family has access to that, well, at least they get half, you know, or your kids or whatever. But I think it's, again, diversify between exchanges, diversify between storage.
And so, Matty, just to move to you then, what's the current process you're using to store your digital assets?
I mean, I probably don't need to elaborate much further than Jigs, to be honest with you. I think I'm very much in the same boat. I run my business in the same manner. I'm big on diversification, and a word that I love is de-risking. And I think what Jigs touched on is exactly what I'm doing at the moment. The only other further thing that I've done is as a part of my own personal will, which I encourage everyone, it's not too early to get a will set up, is actually have my lawyer be a custodian of my keys as well. So that's sent with them. There's a whole heap of legal jargon that one would need to go through in order to access it. But it's something that is the only other measure that I've done through cold storage, including my famous little words. That's probably the only other additional bit of information that I've been privy to or thought of. And that makes me feel comfortable, because if something does happen to me, I've got a trusted person that holds the keys and the magic keys, and they can give them, whether it be my wife or my kids, access to it all. So, and to be honest with you, at the moment, every time I'm setting up an exchange with different passwords or codes, then I actually personally print out something and I actually hand it to my lawyer. I don't send it via email. I literally print it, delete it, and then go hand it to my lawyer. So that might seem a bit extreme, but it's just something that
it is important to do those things. I mean, you just can't, in this digital world, you can't take risks.
Yeah, it might seem old-fashioned to some, but you know, the reality is we have watched. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I don't believe that everything that comes across my screen is coincident. You know, there's been some strange stuff that's occurred to me in my life there. Yeah, I'm a bit too probably smart to not recognize, or maybe not as naive as some to recognize that. So yes, it's amazing. It's amazing the extremes that I've decided to go to with this space in terms of preserving wealth. You know, I had someone ask me today about that. And so securing the preservation of wealth is a key. I think strategic, almost understanding how you're securing your wealth, and preserving that through the security measures that we've taken through diversification is almost more important, in my opinion, than actually how to start up an exchange account. You know, these measures that we're speaking about need to be understood almost before you buy your first bit of Bitcoin, in my opinion.
So Jake, just when we're talking about these measures, can you just touch on chain capital and explain that?
Yeah, sure.
Because that's something, as a family, I mean, if you're an individual, yeah, you probably would look at something like this. But as a family, and you have a wife or a partner, or your parents or something, how do you use that to split the keys or the access to it?
Sure. No, well, maybe I'll start just kind of my personal journey through learning about this. So as I mentioned, I first bought Bitcoin using Coinbase. So, you know, now an IPO'd American exchange, huge company. Frankly, I kept my coins on an exchange for most of the last 5 years. I did buy a Trezor. So Jigsy mentioned a ledger. Trezor is another provider of this. What's hard to get your head around and to understand initially is Bitcoin is a brand new financial system. It's something that we don't understand it until we learn about it. And so this concept of a blockchain is the complete antithesis to the current system, which relies on trust and third parties and centralized ledgers. And the whole concept of a bank is, you know, really an accountant sitting in the middle, making sure that, you know, if Jake sends £5 to Jigs, does he have £5 in his account? Yes, he does. Confirm transaction, Jigs gets £5. Now, what Bitcoin does is the complete opposite, which is the design philosophy of don't trust, verify. And even today, you can log onto websites and you can see every single Bitcoin address in the world, how much Bitcoin's in them. 100% you can go and do this right now. Maybe we could do an excerpt and do a chart just to show you how it's actually done. It's an open ledger. It's an open blockchain. It's completely private, so you cannot tell who owns those addresses, but you know for sure what's in there. And when you send Bitcoin from one address to the other, it's what's called a bearer asset. So in the same way that if I had gold bullion in my pocket and I gave it to Jigs, I've literally handed over that wealth, or what humans think of as wealth, is that gold bullion represents a lot of work. You know, you've got to get off your ass and either earn that with your time and expertise, or you've got to go and dig it out of the ground, both of which require work, which is why it ends up storing value. So you almost have to unlearn a lot of one's preconceptions to what like storing wealth actually is when you look at Bitcoin. So first step, exchange. Then you can start looking at some of these, what they call hardware wallets. So Ledger and Trezor is a good example. You buy on an exchange, you have a wallet in the exchange. You can then buy a Trezor, which is this little USB basically. It sticks into the side of your computer. It then logs onto the Trezor website. It generates an address. You have a PIN code, and then you have a backup seed phrase. Now, if you lose that USB or that hardware, that's not a big deal. As long as you still have the seed phrase, then you get a new USB arrive in the post. You use the seed phrase to plug into the USB, and that is then the key to the wallet that you've created. If you lose the USB and you lose the seed phrase, you've lost access to that account.
But my understanding is do you have to buy another USB, like a Trezor or a Ledger? You could use any wallet and put in those keys, and basically what it's doing is it's just
so it could be a cold card, not cold card, but it could be a Ledger, it could be a Trezor, one of these different brands.
Yeah, but it's just they are all chain and pulling up your info.
Yeah, so I guess we spoke about ramps earlier. So an exchange is a ramp. the same, like you can use any exchange. They're all basically doing the same thing, which is helping you purchase Bitcoin. It's all open source software. So the same thing applies to these hardware wallets. The beauty of them is that for someone who, as we've talked about in previous episodes, father died, inherited money, being interested in wealth preservation, I outsource the responsibility of that task to a wealth manager, a portion of it. So when you buy Bitcoin and you use a hardware wallet, you're the only person in the world that can access that account with those private keys. So you're taking total self-custody of your wealth. This is completely mind-bending versus the traditional system. So it's well worth learning about. It's incredibly empowering. And there's a lot of tangential subjects to this around sovereignism and the sovereign individual, and the idea of the death of the nation state, and why the separation of money and state is so important, and how now, if you are even in recent times, like parts of the world that have degraded into, unsavory events, such as Syria, right? Middle-class Syrian families have had to flee Syria with nothing, right? They left their factories behind, their restaurants behind, their houses behind. Had they been able to store their wealth in a digital wallet like Bitcoin, all they've got to take with them, not even the USB stick, they've got to take 12 words in their head wherever they go, and they can then access this open source system. So there's a lot of learning to be done, which initially requires unlearning, and then it's like a whole new place. So just my personal journey then, so exchange to then a single Trezor, and then it was really this year when I started taking Bitcoin seriously as a genuine store of wealth. And I sold a load of other assets. I started buying more Bitcoin. And as part of that process, I did some research on how to best store things. And you guys have mentioned inheritance planning or accident planning. My father was 48. He died overnight, or during the daytime, but blink of eye, completely unexpected. He didn't expect to die at all. He was leveraged up, just getting into the nitty gritty of his last 10 years of career before retiring. He was just about to, really do some big business deals, etc. So understanding how to make sure that, if I was to get hit by a bus tomorrow, how does my wife get hold of this money? Or how do my kids get hold of this money? How do I make sure it goes to the right people? How do I make sure that it's available? And there are all sorts of stories in the digital asset space of people who, they died and they left behind literally $500 million in digital assets that no one can find. They cannot get hold of them. Even in Bitcoin, there are 18 million Bitcoin that have now been already mined, but there's not that many in circulation, or even in wallets that have been moved.
I think there's 2 to 4 million that have been lost.
They've been lost forever, right? You hear stories of people who threw out laptops, and they've literally dug an entire scrap heap up trying to find the laptop, because the laptop's now worth, God knows how many billions of Bitcoin. So my solution to this problem was a company called Unchained Capital. They're based in Austin, Texas, and they're utilizing a technology called multi-signature. So previously I had just one single Trezor with the seed backup that could allow me to enter the passphrase to get into my my hardware wallet, which is an offline Bitcoin storage, basically. So an exchange carries risk, whether it can be hacked, whether it can be regulated by a government, and you might not, you might suddenly lose access.
It could be a rug pulled.
Sorry?
Be your rug pulled.
Yeah, correct. But even Celsius carries some kind of counterparty,
of course.
Right? So we mentioned yield products. Fantastic, earning passive income on a digital assets. This is amazing, right? Absolutely, it's part of the future of one's wealth preservation. But it carries risk. What if Celsius suddenly gets regulated? What if Celsius suddenly, goes under? What if Alex Mashinsky, decides to take all your money? We don't know the answers to those things. They might not happen. They very unlikely will, to be honest, but there's still a risk. So you can just choose to store in a hardware wallet your coins.
Which is why diversifying your storage is really important.
Correct, right? So multi-sig, so basically I have 2 keys and Unchained has 1. You need to have 2 of the 3 keys in order to send any of the Bitcoin that are in that wallet anywhere else. And in my case, I store those keys in 2 separate locations. So heaven, this won't happen, and it's extremely unlikely. But if someone wanted to break in and steal my Bitcoin, they'd have to first find out where I live. They find out where I live. They'd have to come here, and then they'd have to basically put a gun to my head and say, "Where's your Bitcoin keys?" And I would be like, "Well, they're not actually at my house. They're in 2 other different locations that we'd have to somehow get to without, my wife or someone else alerting the police to the fact that we're in a hostage situation, which is incredibly risky for anyone to try and steal anything from me." There's an interesting discussion on how this is going to reduce theft. Stealing gold is really easy. People go to war to steal gold, but actually, or steal property of any form, it's physical. But how do you steal people's digital assets when they're basically a key that are stored in your head that you may or may not have access to? The return on investment for taking risk to steal from you is lower. I'm ranting a bit much here, Jigsy. Let me just finish slightly. So there's 2 or 3 keys. Unchained has a 3rd. I then distributed to a few family members if an accident happens, do X. And basically Unchained are able to help you recover those funds if anything happens. So let's say I died tomorrow, touch wood, Lozzie would be able to get on the phone to Unchained and they'd talk her through how to access those funds. Even though I've, taught her about it and there are instructions lying around in physical form that I have never sent anywhere. The concept behind it is, from an inheritance planning perspective, you're safer, and from an exchange risk and counterparty risk perspective, you're safer. This is the real Bitcoin maximalist concept. I don't use a yield service for any of my Bitcoin. I'm playing around a little bit with Ethereum I've got from a few years ago. I see huge value in passive income from digital assets. And if you see value in that, and it requires you to use a custodial service such as Celsius, then there are trade-offs, but it could well be worth it. That was a lot of talking all in one, but that's roughly been my journey and my current setup.
Very well explained. I mean, if I was in your position where I was working, I'm retired, and I'll be nudging up 1 year in 12 days of retirement.
Well done.
But just in terms of if I was working, I'd be dollar cost averaging in each week into Bitcoin. Even now, I'd still be doing it and capturing, preserving some of my time spent. But I don't have that opportunity. So that's where I used making yield to capture some more. But then I'm also, I'm a hybrid trader, and I know how to leverage alts to capture more Bitcoin through the charts. That's just something I'm good at, and I learned that I have a skill at, and been taught through Steve Courtney. But that's interesting to see how you've got that set up. And so would you could potentially have on 2 of the 3 keys on different continents even. Yep. So you can, it really makes it difficult for someone to, come in your house.
It would be incredibly hard to steal from you.
Yeah. Okay.
Ideologically, going back to what I was talking about war, it's something that is discussed in the space a bit, which I really love from a conceptual perspective. The idea of, from a wealth perspective, you're using tools that make it almost impossible to steal from you, which, if everyone in society adopted these tools, reduces the return on investment of physical theft. So imagine a society in the future in which people are storing their wealth using these tools, where actually mugging someone on the street is completely pointless because you can't actually get anything physical that makes any difference.
I'm not sure if you guys saw on Twitter in the last 24 hours, but in America, there was actually camera footage of an ATM being stolen. And when the cops turned up,
I saw it.
They actually realized that there was a Bitcoin ATM and a fiat ATM next to each other, and they stole the Bitcoin ATM. So
but let's talk
I don't know
that.
if you, well, I don't know if any of you guys have used the Bitcoin ATM. Sorry?
Would they be able to access the Bitcoin?
Well, my understanding of a Bitcoin ATM is you can go there and you can deposit cash in, and then you get what's it called? The QR code or whatever of your Bitcoin, right? So that's my understanding. So they obviously see that people have been depositing money. to get Bitcoin, and that's why they've stolen.
So they're stealing the machine to get the fiat cash out of it, rather
probably,
than
probably because they see that everyone's putting it in there instead of in the ATM. I don't know. So that's my understanding.
No, sorry, can I just touch on one thing? This is something not to be glossed over by any stretch of the imagination. But Jake, have you checked out Jigs's jumper, mate? That is a pink buck.
Yeah, with the shoulder pads. It's going on there.
Shoulder and show us your elbows.
I bought this in South Africa in I think it was 2014, and it's last.
Can you just show me your elbows as well, mate? I reckon I've seen a bit of.
This is my grandpa
rolling through the undergrowth with his rifle.
Yes, I got the grandpa jumper on it.
We'll be starting up a fashion show next week for all our. All right,
don't get jealous, Craig, all your life, huh?
So, boys, just to try and wrap up this storage thing. In my head, to summarize it, there are different tactics to store your digital assets, and they have different risk profiles, and it depends on how far down the journey you've gone, and what kind of inheritance planning you want to put in place and how it's actually done. It's a very nascent industry, this. I actually, as an entrepreneur, see all sorts of opportunities in inheritance planning. Like, traditionally, you would use a wealth manager. The wealth manager would have contact information with your lawyer. You'd have a will. The will would stay X, Y, Z. And then, on becoming deceased, you'd probably have a trust. All of the assets would transfer to the trust, and therefore you might avoid inheritance tax, or you then have like a value dissemination strategy or whatever's put in place. With digital assets, it's going to be different. And, you just don't want to kick the bucket tomorrow with a whole load of like apps that you're using that you haven't told anyone about how to access, because they might never find all this value again. So definitely having a strategy in mind for like the emergency plan is really important. I'm not yet on board with all of these yield services. I'm more conservative with my Bitcoin. I like to store it in cold storage, never going to touch it in theory. But Jigsy actually shared with me a technical analyst's report from last week that said we might see a $600,000 Bitcoin market in April of next year, at which point selling some of it might well be, almost too tempting, just from a perspective of, the next couple of years and lifestyle and, paying for some of the bills in daily life.